Are you thinking about moving to St. Simons Island, Georgia? Well, stay tuned because today we're going to talk about the top pros and top cons of living on St. Simons Island, Georgia. That way you can decide if this beautiful coastal island is the right fit for you. And be sure to stay tuned because when you hear one of these cons, you might just turn the video off and decide right then and there that St. Simons Island just isn't the right fit for you. Let's get into it. It should come of no surprise that pro number one is absolutely the coastal lifestyle and natural beauty that St. Simons Island has to offer. If you love being close to coastal waterways, having access to fishing, kayaking, boating, or just lazing around on the beach, then you will absolutely love living on St. Simons Island. I haven't had one client contact me and say, hey, I'm thinking of moving to St. Simons Island, Georgia, but I don't want to be next to the beach or the water. Like, that just doesn't happen. Obviously, that's a huge pro of living on St. Simons Island is the beautiful coastal Georgia waterway. Whether you prefer Florida beaches over Georgia beaches, most people still just love living next to the water. There is something statistically about your health and being next to the water where it really just lowers your central nervous system, makes you feel calm, more connected, more grounded. Whatever your belief system may be, living next to the water has some major benefits. And I'm not just talking about all the recreational activities and just everyday fun that could be had living next to the water, just the beauty of even driving over the causeway to get onto St. Simons Island. You see the water instantly. You're just like, you see the boats out there, all of that fun stuff. So if that's a huge perk to you, then that's pro number one. And that leads me into con number one. So we're gonna go pro, con, pro, con. I've got 5 pros and 5 cons. And con number one is going to be the lack of affordability. That's right, living on St. Simons Island comes with a pretty steep price tag. So fun little story, my husband and I, when we first got married, we were living in Swanee. And when we were relocating here, researching like crazy, and we were looking at Brunswick and St. Simons Island. Anyway, we got moved down here, and well, before we got moved down here, we were looking at both Brunswick and St. Simons Island. Well, little did I know, we were in our 20s, just married, we were looking at St. Simons, looking at Brunswick. We ended up living in Brunswick because the affordability factor. Your dollars stretch so much further in Brunswick than they do on the island. So if you are considering living on St. Simons Island, you really need to consider your budget because it's not just the housing price tag that comes along with overall expense. So if you are looking at getting on the island, let's just say you're looking at a single family home. Now there are condos and duplexes and townhomes, but even those are gonna ring you up. Probably the lowest you're gonna get is around $300,000, and that would be for like a 2-bedroom condo. That is probably outdated, like extremely outdated. But if you're looking at a single family home, the lowest we really see is like the mid 400s, and that will be there's a specific area and neighborhood where you can find that style of home. It's still gonna be a smaller home, but you can find some single family homes around the $450,000 range. So you've got to call me if that is your budget and you're like, I don't care, I absolutely want to live on St. Simons Island. This is my budget. We can find it for you. So if you're not looking in that specific neighborhood to be around the $450,000 range, then where you're gonna see the bulk of the housing is gonna be in the $500,000 range up to about $800,000 or $900,000 range. So I know it's kind of a steep window, but that's about what you need to live on St. Simons Island. And then not to mention housing prices, but then you've got probably a little bit higher taxes, but still relatively low in comparison to other places. I have a lot of clients that relocate from New York or California, and they are just shocked at how much lower our property taxes are here in Georgia. And then of course you're going to have a little bit higher insurance, just being on, ocean, waterways, marsh, anything. You likely will have flood insurance, which is factored into your mortgage payments. So all of that is taken into consideration. And then not to mention, it is a touristy area. So with that just naturally comes inflation. Restaurants, things like that, they can charge a little bit more because people are on vacation, So if you're living there, you kind of get looped in with the people that are on vacation, just throwing out money left and right. So that is con number one, and that is the affordability. So if affordability matters to you, then you might ought to look into Brunswick, Georgia as well. You can still live in Brunswick and be 20 to 30 minutes from St. Simons Island. So if that's a factor, definitely consider that. And diving right into pro number 2 is it is a small town feel and a very tight-knit community. So the island itself is actually pretty small. They're trying to build and cram as much on that little island as they can, which leads us to another con coming up soon. But most people absolutely love the cute, charming, small town feel. So it's not like a lot of these larger beach areas where they've got these high-rise condos that go, you know, up 8 stories, blocking every single view. It's not like that. I think the tallest most of our buildings go is maybe 5 stories, and we don't even have a ton like that. And there is the St. Simons Land Trust, which has done a really good job of buying up pockets of land to where nothing can be built on them to preserve the natural beauty of St. Simons Island. So I will say all of those, you know, things are in place to preserve some of the land so that it doesn't become another, you know, like Charleston or another Hilton Head Island. I get a lot of clients that are like, hi, I want to buy an investment property I'm considering, or a retirement property. I'm considering Hilton Head Island and St. Simons Island, which I can see why they're both very similar and big golf communities. But 9 times out of 10, those people say, hey, I went to Hilton Head Island. I can't handle the traffic. It's just too crowded. I don't like it. And so they end up with St. Simons Island because it's similar to Hilton Head, but just on a much smaller scale. So I do think St. Simons has done a really good job of keeping that small town feel. You know, it's very likely that who you go to church with on Sunday, you're gonna see at the coffee shop on Monday morning, or see them at the gym, at the club, playing pickleball. Like, you're going to know your neighbors. This is Georgia. We like to know our neighbors. We like to talk at the grocery store. So it's a very small town feel. And that takes me into con number 2, and that is peak season, tourist season. Yes, we love our tourism here. We want to share St. Simons Island and the beautiful Golden Isles with everybody in the world. But if you live on St. Simons Island, it does get a little bit hectic during the peak season months, which is obviously summer. Although, because this is Georgia and it's very hot here, we have longer windows of time when people can come here and be on the beach. I mean, I remember being 8 months pregnant and on the beach in February, like in a bathing suit in February. So that's a blessing, but also that means other people are still traveling to come here and take advantage of the warmth. So when I was working over on the island, it gets a little frustrating because you're allowed to drive golf carts on the road. Amazing if you're on vacation, right? But if you live here and you're trying to go to work and there's golf carts and there's people biking, and you know, it gets a little old, I'll be honest. At least it did for me. Just because when you're on vacation, you're in just leisure mode, you know, you're invincible. And then when you live here and you're just doing the same thing every day, it's a little bit different, right? So, and not to mention, you know, that adds into the traffic, and that adds into longer wait times. So we really just we don't even go out to eat on St. Simons Island during the summertime, really, just because it's crowded everywhere and there's longer wait times. But once it becomes fall and school goes back, it's like wide open. The beach is, you know, very minimal traffic on the beach, and all of the there's no wait times at the restaurants anymore. So that is something to consider as a con, and you may not see it as a con. Let me know down below if you think that is for you or not. And don't forget, don't go anywhere, because that's not the con that I was saying. You might just decide this isn't for you. Let's jump into pro number 3, which is an amazing food scene. Obviously, being on the coast, we have access to awesome shrimp, oysters, fish, anything like that. So our seafood is amazing, but we also have a lot of other options. You've probably heard of Southern Soul Barbecue. It's been featured in numerous magazines. It's definitely a staple, somewhere that you must go. We've got tons of other amazing restaurants. One of my personal favorites is called the Half Shell. Personally, I think it needs to get more credit than it does, but it's amazing, especially if you love oysters. It is a must, and that is located at the pier, the village and the pier. So we have this awesome area, and it's got tons of restaurants and shopping. You've got access to the water. The lighthouse is there, and they do a good job of holding events out there, and there's multiple playgrounds, the library. So that's a good spot, just kind of like a central hub to go when looking to eat. And then we've also got Red Fern Village, which has numerous restaurants as well. Bubba Garcia's is one of our favorite. And tons of other restaurants. I'm not gonna go through the whole list of restaurants, but we have an amazing food scene here on St. Simons Island. But then also if you head over the causeway and go into Brunswick, downtown Brunswick has a booming food scene. Honestly, I prefer to go to downtown Brunswick than the island, just my personal preference. But they have a great food scene down there as well that you have close access to. So that is pro number 3. Now that takes us into con number 3, and that is a limited job market. Now, because it's a touristy area, you do have a large amount of jobs in the hospitality and restaurant industry. So if that is your bread and butter, then you'll be set. I mean, Sea Island employs a lot of jobs. There's a lot of hotels as far as hospitality is concerned. You know, rental management, that kind of stuff, real estate. But then as far as like a corporate style job, because this is a smaller town, there's not a lot of corporate jobs. Now in Brunswick, there are a decent amount of job opportunities, and a lot of people do live on St. Simons Island and drive over to Brunswick. It's not that long of a drive, but let me just tell you, people that live on St. Simons Island, they do not like to go over that causeway into Brunswick. They will complain every single time, and I get it, the island's amazing, but a lot of the things that you will do will be over the causeway in Brunswick. One of the pros within that con is that St. Simons Island is sandwiched right in between 2 major cities. So I'll just say an hour and a half, but probably closer to an hour and 15. You can get to Savannah, which is north of St. Simons Island, or Jacksonville, Florida, which is south of St. Simons Island. So pretty easily, both of which you just go over the causeway to get into Brunswick, and then you just hop on I-95, Interstate 95, and it takes you right up to Savannah or right down to Jacksonville. So that is a huge pro of living on St. Simons Island, is the close access to larger cities. So although we don't have a ton of corporate style jobs on St. Simons Island or even in Brunswick, the surrounding area, we do have close access to larger cities. And fortunately, a lot of people work from home now. So if that is you, then maybe that con doesn't even affect you. Okay, and that leads me into pro number 4, and that is the walkability and the opportunity to just zip on a golf cart or bike around. So I know I touched on this a little bit, but one of the huge perks of living on St. Simons Island, I'll preference this with a story. So when we first moved down here, we were looking, like I told you, at both St. Simons Island and Brunswick. Coming from Suwanee, Georgia, it's a pretty active community, a lot of young people, a lot of people, like if you drive around, you'd see, you know, there's a lot of bigger developments and neighborhoods and sidewalks, and you would just always see people running and jogging and walking their dogs. Well, when we came to Brunswick, we were like, we don't see anybody. Like, where are the people running? Like, healthy people, you know, like young, healthy people. Like, what are they doing? Where are they? And then we'd go over to St. Simons and be like, oh, here they are. Like, here are the people walking their dogs and running and just, you know, out on a walk, on just a stroll. So that is a huge perk of living on St. Simons Island. There are just sidewalks galore because it's a big touristy town. And like I said, people just move slower out there. You know, on the island, they're on island time. That is a real thing. People say it, and it is a real thing. You know, so you get that opportunity to ride bikes and walk around, and so you may not even have to use your car that much. I mean, it's not like a big city. You still, if you live there, you probably still need a car, but you do get the opportunity depending on where you live on the island. Now, there is a big difference between living on the south end of St. Simons Island and living on the north end of St. Simons Island. If you live on the north end of St. Simons Island, you are not walking to anything. That is like the country of St. Simons Island. So, and it sounds ridiculous because I don't live on St. Simons Island. I actually do live in what's considered the country. So it sounds ridiculous, but it is very true. It's kind of separated. So if you need more information on that breakdown, I have a great map that breaks down the different areas of St. Simons Island. Just all my information is down in the description box below. Pause this video, reach out to me, and I will give you that breakdown so that you make sure you move to the right area of St. Simons Island, because it can be a little bit different. So that pro is the walkability, the access to biking, golf carts, just you know, really having that access to just leisurely stroll through, you know, bike down to get ice cream with the kids at night, or walk your dog down to the restaurant, all those fun things. Which also leads me right into con number 4, and I did briefly touch on this earlier, and that is the traffic and the fact that there's only one way on this beautiful little island and one way off. So if there is a major accident on the FJ Tourist Causeway, you're not getting on the island, or you're not getting off the island. It could be dead stop. I mean, there were times I was living in Brunswick and I was teaching yoga and bar and spin over at a really cute studio on St. Simons, and I'd be calling them like, the causeway's closed, I can't get to class, you know, like, I'm so sorry. You know, if something like that happens, you can't change it, you know, if you're stuck in Brunswick or you're stuck on the island, you can't get off. Now, it doesn't usually happen all day. They're very good at clearing those things, but sometimes it would happen for, you know, because then traffic builds up and it would be hours sometimes. And not to mention when there are really big storms, because we are in an area prone to, I don't even really want to say hurricanes more than I want to say tropical storms, but hurricane season is a factor, because flooding, obviously when you have a bridges have to close. So that is kind of a big deal with one way on and one way off, because then you're either stuck off the island or you're stuck on the island. So, you know, if flooding is a factor, or storms, or accidents, and then also just everyday traffic, not even during tourist season, but because the island is so small, there's only so many places for people to go, right? And there's only so many roads to travel. It's really like a big loop around the island. So getting on the causeway, like at morning, quote unquote, rush hour, you're gonna get in some traffic at the end of the causeway. Now I use the term rush hour loosely. That is mostly people getting on the causeway, and then because Frederica Academy, one of the larger private schools on the island, it always backs up that traffic. But after 8 a.m., that traffic kind of clears and you can move freely. But just like any other place, there's gonna be specific times that you're like, oh, I'm gonna leave after school and all that kind of stuff. But that is definitely something to consider. The last time I showed a house out there, I was like, okay, get me off the island, because the traffic was so bad. Mind you, it was, you know, we just finished summer. So, and that's just personal preference. Now that it's fall, you know, we went out to the beach yesterday and it wasn't bad at all. But it kind of ebbs and flows. But if you're coming from a larger city, then you probably will be amazed and be like, this is nothing. This traffic's amazing. So just keep that in mind, whether that is a pro or a con for you. Okay, and this brings us to our last pro. Pro number 5 is top rated schools for our area. So if you look at niche.com, because as an ethical realtor, I can't steer in any way based on schools. So this is not my opinion. I'm just simply pointing you to the facts. I'm gonna link it down below, but niche.com actually ranks St. Simons Island as number 13 out of 289 as places with the best public schools in Georgia. Now that's huge. All of the, and I'm just looking at niche.com right here, all of the schools that serve at St. Simons Island rank at least an A on niche.com. Now, there are 2 schools on St. Simons Island, and those are both elementary schools. There's Oglethorpe Point Elementary School, and then there's St. Simons Elementary School. Those are the only 2 schools, public schools, on St. Simons Island. So depending on where you live on the island, you'll go to one of those 2 schools for elementary school. There is one middle school, it's in Brunswick, and that is zoned for Glen Middle School, which on niche.com also ranks an A. But you do have to go over the causeway because Glen Middle School is located in Brunswick, Georgia. So for some people, they're like, oh, that's a bummer. But buses do run. So if you let your kids ride the bus, they can ride the bus over to Glen Middle School. It's probably 15 minutes to the middle school. And then St. Simons Island is zoned to Glen Academy High School. So there are 2 public high schools in Brunswick, or all of Glen County, I should say. And so all of St. Simons Island is zoned to Glen Academy High School, which is located in downtown Brunswick. It's actually a beautiful building, very old, historic, and gorgeous. And of the 2, actually, and this is based off of greatschools.org, Glenn Academy is the higher ranking high school than Brunswick High. Now they are very close in the rankings, but just based on those facts, Glenn Academy ranks a little bit higher, and all of St. Simons Island is zoned to Glenn Academy High School. Now, other than public schools, there are numerous private schools located on the island and also off the island. So based on niche.com's rankings, Frederica Academy is an A+. Every mom I've known that lives on the island or even off the island that sends their kids to private school at Frederica Academy just rave about it. They love it. They have some of the best, quote unquote, best programs for even like summer camps and stuff. They do some great summer camps over the summer. That is the top rated private school on St. Simons Island. And then there's St. Simons Island Christian School, St. Francis Xavier Catholic School, which is located in downtown Brunswick, Brunswick Christian Academy, Heritage Christian Academy. There's a few others, and you can check out all of that about the schools on niche.com. But basically what I'm saying is, based on all of that information, St. Simons Island has some of the top rated schools. And there's also a very large homeschooling community on St. Simons Island and Golden Isles in general. So there's numerous amounts of co-ops. Now, most of those do meet in Brunswick, but a lot of St. Simoners, I should say, Islanders, travel from St. Simons over there, and there's some hybrid school options as well. So if you are a homeschooling family like we are, then just know that if public school or private school is not for you, there's also a large homeschooling community here in the Golden Isles. Okay, and also coupled in with that pro is niche.com ranks St. Simons Island number 73 out of 412 places for best places to raise a family in Georgia. And they also rank St. Simons Island as number 2 out of 228 for best places to retire in Georgia. So that's really cool. St. Simons Island, based on that information, you could say is a great place to raise a family and a great place to retire. So again, not my personal opinion. Everything is from niche.com, which I will link down below in the description box. But St. Simons does a really good job of holding a lot of events. And so they do like summer concert series. They always have art markets down at the Village and Pier, farmers markets. They have lots of little farm stands. And so there's always something going on St. Simons Island. And again, when we first moved here, that was one of the, kind of bigger things too. We were considering St. Simons over Brunswick before we realized at that time we couldn't afford it, because there was always more going on St. Simons than there was in Brunswick. Like there was always a live band somewhere, and when you're a young family, that was kind of like the things you just wanted to go out and do things. Now, not that I'm old now, but now I just want to stay home with my chickens and, all that. So it really just depends on what you're looking for, but there's always something to do on St. Simons Island. Okay, and that brings us to con number 5, and this may be your deciding factor. That is the weather and the probability for flood insurance, tropical storms, hurricanes. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit. So our weather is unique in the fact that it's very, very hot and humid. With heat and humidity come a lot of bugs. Okay, coastal Georgia has a lot of bugs. We have a lot of gnats. We call them the no-see-ums. So if you are looking at housing, my biggest tip that I tell all of my clients, and again, call me because I will give you all of these tips, but the biggest thing I tell them is you want your porch to be screened in. If it's not already screened in, you need to screen it in. Otherwise, you're just not going to use your porch. You're not going to enjoy it because we have mosquitoes, we have gnats, we have deer flies, we have just all sorts of biting, flying bugs. And now they all have seasons, so they're not always present, but it is hot and humid like 80% of the year, and the other percent of the year it's really nice because it's not freezing. We have very mild winters, but we have very hot summers. So take that for what you want, whether you think that's a pro or a con. Tell me down below. Is the weather like a huge perk? I have tons of clients that they're tired of the snow. They're calling me because they're like, hey, I want to live where it's just sunny and warm all the time. Although we do have a little bit of a winter season. This past winter, we actually had snow, which was crazy. That hasn't happened here in like 30 years. So the weather can be a little bit unpredictable. We do get a lot of rain towards the end of the summer, which we usually welcome. If you are a gardener like I am, we have a long growing season, which is amazing. But by July, you are like, please, dear God, just let it rain because everything's dying. It's too hot. I mean, our temps were like 100 degrees, but felt like 110. We had a major heat wave this year. Everyone was over it, including the plants. You know, so we do tend to have a rainy season towards the end of summer, which, like I said, we usually welcome because then it kind of cools it down. And then that leads us into hurricane season. So with living on St. Simon's Island, you obviously have the risk of hurricanes, tropical storms, and flooding. So not only does that require a higher flood insurance cost or homeowners insurance, but you also have the risk factor of having to prepare for all of those things. And actually, I have an entire blog post for you guys linked down below on how to prepare for that and why you should prepare for that when living in Glenn County, Georgia. So be sure to check that out down below. But that is just one of the, I guess I would say, cons, but every season is different. Weather is unpredictable, but with those storms comes, you know, either having to shut down the causeway. Sometimes it's a mandatory evacuation. I mean, I've had to evacuate twice since living here in the 8 years that I've been here. So if that's any indication on kind of how that goes, it's not always a mandatory evacuation, but it's up to you to decide whether it's worth staying. And either way, you have to prepare your home for those things. And either way, you likely have to carry flood insurance, which comes with a higher cost. So all of those things are amazing living by the coast, but all of those things are things you have to take into consideration while living on the coast. So it's important to use your realtor, me, aka all my information's down in the description box below. Seriously, I get calls, texts, emails every single day of people just like you looking to relocate right here to St. Simon's Island, Georgia, and I would love to help you. But if you're tired of searching online trying to look for the flood zones, do I need flood insurance for this house or do I not? Because you'd be shocked. Some houses on St. Simon's, you don't need flood insurance, and I know where those homes are. And actually, you kind of have to base it house by house because our coastal waterways kind of do this throughout. If you look at the map, they're just crazy. They go all over. So sometimes you'll have your house not in a flood zone and like the back half of your house and yard is in a flood zone. So then it's kind of lender determinant. But I will say it's never a bad idea to carry it if you have those extra funds just in case. But there are some homes that don't require flood insurance. So it is important to check on each house specifically on which ones require flood insurance. So if you are thinking of making a move to coastal Georgia, like I said, my name's Cassie. Please reach out to me. Pause this video. Everything is down in the description box below. You can call me, text me, email me. Either way, I would love to chat with you. And if you want to know more about living on St. Simon's Island, I put together an entire playlist just for you. You can binge watch all those videos right here. And don't forget to like and subscribe this video. Subscribe to this video because my next video is going to be what does it really cost to live on St. Simon's Island? And you definitely don't want to miss that one.